Gerson. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We are very glad with that. As we talked about several minutes ago, in Chile we have Chile is a very special country because we have a particular political history. We have very high rate of family violence, sexual abuse, and several major disasters. These events are potentially traumatic and may cause significant damage for people who have experienced them. So could you explain me how this event potentially impact on population?
Daniel, thank you very much also for the invitation to come here. It's a big pleasure for me to come here and also to share the knowledge about trauma. And I think that Chile has a lot of experience, and it's good that the group here of the University of Talca tries to improve the knowledge and also to put it into interventions. Regarding to your question, what the effect is for the people who underwent traumatic events, it's important to say that traumatic events are part of life. And so it's not so that people don't know anything about it. For instance, earthquakes, Chile has always had. So people know about the danger, they know about what's happening. And what we see is that earthquakes give potential risk for 1 in 5 people to develop a disorder, which we call post-traumatic stress disorder. We see that most people do not become sick, so to say, because of it. They, of course, are very frightened. It's also your trust in life and in your surrounding is threatened by earthquakes. And also, I didn't see yet, but all the destruction in the city and rebuilding, it's a huge burden. But also later on, I came today in the city, I saw so many new buildings. So I see also the resilience of the people to build again and to build up. Now we come to, for instance, political violence. I went also to the museum of the memorial in Santiago. When people threaten other people, the risk of post-traumatic stress disorder increases very much. Also in sexual abuse with children, sexual violence, when people threaten other people, we see that the risk increases much more. And that is because you lost trust in other people. And we as people, we depend very much on each other. We need each other daily. But when we experience murder or political suppression and so on, it's destroying our trust. And also people who have become perpetrators, they often are forgotten by psychotherapists, but perpetrators often also have their nightmares, have their worries, they can't speak, they are ashamed of it. And when you want to go further, you need all these populations to serve. Huh? Mm-hmm. That's the first answer.
Yep. And specifically, what is the post-traumatic stress disorder and what are the main manifestations or symptoms?
Okay. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder which got its name in 1980, and it was done especially by Americans, and it was after the Vietnam War. And before it was not so much recognized. Well, in the Great War it was called the shell shock and so on. But to tell you what it is exactly is that when you are when a traumatic event happens to you, for instance, when someone tries to murder me, for instance, and I survive this, but I still have the image of what happened. What we know of situations which are very threatening is that our memory of the details is very precise. So when on holiday we need photos to remember where we were, but from traumatic events we don't need photos because we remember it very precisely. And that means that our stress system is enormously stimulated by threat from the outside. So normally, when we have this threat and we survive, then the tension goes away. But we call it a disorder when the tension doesn't go away. So it's a sort of state, you could say PTSD is a sort of state of a sort of warrior against some threat, but the threat was something of the past. And that makes it a disorder. I hope I'm clear. It's strange that people are still fear that it will happen again, but they know also that it will not happen again. But their whole body and also their mind is focused of happening again. The symptoms are what's called re-experience symptoms. That is that involuntary, it comes back to the explosion, you hear it again, also by triggers, which let it comes back in nightmares, and people tend to avoid situations which remembers very much about it. Also, sleeping is difficult. It's a very precise symptom because you can only sleep when you feel safe. So, for instance, after an earthquake, a lot of people will sleep very badly, and some will sleep years later very badly. And then they can have also post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay. Is it possible to treat it? How? How is it possible to treat the post-traumatic stress disorder?
It's important for people to realize that by talking alone, it will not disappear. So it's an idea that you have to work through it, you have to talk with your friends, your family, which people like to do often. But also the family doesn't want to know all the details. The fear is a sort of switch which you can't put out. What we use in all trauma-focused treatments, which are now there are more available, well worked out, is that you need exposure to put the switch back. And maybe you heard about the EMDR, which people use with the fingers, is that at the moment that you remember the terrible moment, you become so distracted by this finger moving that at a certain moment you have difficulty to remember precisely. In the treatment which I developed, much before EMDR, my idea is that people are mostly afraid about the strong emotions connected to it, like sorrow, like grief, like anger. And when you go back specific to terrible moments, which people think in the beginning they are crazy, the therapist, I don't want to go back. But when you explain that when you go back, that then the crying will start, and that the tense will go away, that the sleep will improve, that is what we call treatment.
Okay. You created a specific treatment therapy. Could you explain me the theoretical and empirical basis of your proposal?
Yeah, the brief eclectic psychotherapy, it's called eclectic because from different psychological schools elements have been integrated. It starts with what we call psychoeducation, which means that we explain to the patient and the partner very precisely to understand for instance, why it is difficult to sleep. For most psychotherapists, they think, well, people understand. But in reality, much of the symptoms people, because they never know anything about psychology, they don't understand. So psychoeducation is very important to get a sort of first feeling of control about what happened. Then the exposure, which I explained already a bit. And so the exposure is in my treatment that you go very slowly through the event and that then emotions will come back. For instance, a man who survived an airplane who I treated, that at the moment that the plane is struck on the ground, that he also sees how the whole environment of the plane has struck, how people got fire at Rose after him, how the shouting of people who are burning to death, and how he climbs over other people to jump out of the plane. And it's all in a moment that this is happening. It's a gruesome details. And later on, he is ashamed that he survived. Which everyone said, you must be happy because you survived. But he's not happy because he climbed over other people. So what's also in this treatment is that you go very slowly through all these elements. He starts crying, and after the crying he feels relaxed. Then the second part of the treatment is what we call the domain of meaning. It's to learn from what is happening. And this man, for instance, learned that he is a good man, but he has before he had a very naive idea about being a good person. Now he understands that he climbed over other people who he could not help. But he hated that he had to accept his powerlessness. And he went, it's a farewell ritual, which is the end of the treatment. He has taken his bag in the plane, out of the plane, and the bag became a sort of tool of shame. And he went back to Portugal where the air crash happened, and there he put the bag back into the things of the airplane. So I hope it's a bit clear. It must be complicated, but first it's the fear, it's the sorrow, and the second part is to learn from it, to understand. We have a sort of slogan we use for the treatment, it's sadder but wiser. And so we don't say you're fixed, because the PTSD will never completely vanish, because we always will remember these settling moments. When people who went here through the earthquake, I'm sure in Talca they will never forget it.
Okay. Finally, do you have some recommendation or suggestions for people who have experienced this kind of event?
Well, it's a good question. It's not so easy to answer. It's very important that a traumatic event, that most people will not develop PTSD, not post-traumatic stress disorder. So that people are not confused by it. They don't think, I must have this disorder. So when we see the process is that people, especially with social support, be together. For instance, we had recently in the Netherlands, we had this air crash of an airplane in Ukraine, where a lot of 289 Dutch people were in the plane. They all died. And so the people who are not survivors, but their families, the important thing is to be together and not go directly to a therapist or go to debriefing all day. You need a lot of information, but being together, that is the way to survive. And that's also what people do. When you look after disasters, people tend to come together. They help each other. They become friends. that they also suffer very much. And when you are alone, for instance with sexual assault or sexual violence, you feel very alone mostly, and you are ashamed to talk about it, that you have other peers of your age group which are very helpful in contacting. And also when people see on television or on the internet information about psychotrauma, we also have our own website, but you must also have your website here, I think. People will look at it, learn from it, and find out if they really need treatment.